he certainly defined independent filmmaking, you know, in the 60s and 70s. I mean, he's always worked completely underneath the radar of conventional Hollywood, and has made, you know, 500 or 600 films in the process. So that makes him the quintessential independent. He also always mixed his kind of exploitation films, and he was very upfront that he was making exploitation films, with the you know, the art films that he imported, that he brought in, you know, the Fellini films and you know, all the European films that were significant in the 70s and even into the early 80s were coming in through Roger, you know. So there was this strange schizophrenia, but for him it was all grist for the mill. They were all independent films.
The year 2000. America is a vast speedway. People line the streets to witness the greatest drivers on earth in a race from sea to shining sea.
This is a death race.
You finish first, or not at all. Death Race 2000. Every car a deadly weapon. Every spectator a potential point. It's a cross-country road wreck, and the traffic is murder. He was built by the world's finest surgeons to drive the fastest car ever designed, and nothing can stop him now. Death Race 2000, rated R.
Roger was a pioneer. Roger was a pioneer. Even though he was not a throwback to Griffith and people like that, he did movies the way they did them. Roger Corman was a cradle for my generation of actors, writers, directors, and cinematographers. Came out of that era.
I don't know how he made the turn from what he was studying into show business, but he did, and thank God he did, because, you know, look how rich this legacy is that he's given us. Anyway, what did I learn? The same thing that I had learned from my dad all of those years. Do it. Get it done. You don't have to spend a fortune. You don't have to keep doing it and doing it. Just do it. People who are performers are supposed to know how to do what they do and do it fast. I don't know, Roger, he exhibited discipline in a very nice, gentle way.
Roger Corman cannot be categorized as just a producer or a director who makes independent films. He is more precisely a writer, producer, director, studio head, and godfather to any number of young actors and filmmakers who began their careers under his watchful eye. Corman's extraordinary career ranks with the most amazing of Hollywood success stories. He has both produced and directed more than 550 motion pictures, almost every one of which has made money. He has made more successful feature films than any other person ever in the motion picture business.
Probably my first memories of going to movies was the memory of going to Saturday matinees with my friends. We used to see a double feature and a serial. The serials were the classic cliffhangers, and I loved them. Living in Southern California probably did play a role in my decision to become a filmmaker. I had started out to be an engineer, following my father's footsteps. And I think the lure of motion pictures and the fact that when I had gone to school, the parents of some of my friends worked in the film industry, and just the general interest, excitement, and glamour of the film industry as such drew me. When I started, Hollywood was very highly unionized, and it was very difficult to get a job. So I came out of Stanford with a degree in engineering and got a job riding a bicycle delivering messages. And at that time, the studios worked 6 days a week in shooting, but the office employees worked 5. So I volunteered to work a 6th day for nothing if I could be on the set and observe and learn. And they said yes, and I did observe and learn, and also part of my plan was that they would be aware that I was an eager young guy, and I got promoted to be a reader in the story department. I was called a story analyst. It was sort of an attempt to make us feel as if we were more important than we were. They had been looking for an offbeat Western for Gregory Peck, and I had remembered a script that I'd covered called The Big Gun that I thought was pretty good. And I wrote a revision of the script and handed it in, and they liked it, and the picture was made based upon my revisions, and the head of the story department got a bonus for his great work on the script, so I left Fox.
Sit in this chair and I'll pose you.
Kind of rickety. How's this pose?
Oh, that's fine. It's very good. Just stay like that.
That doesn't look like very much clay.
Oh, it's enough. Put this around your neck.
In 1954, Corman wrote his first screenplay, The House and the Sea, which eventually was changed to Highway Dragnet. He proceeded to sell the screenplay to Allied artists, where he gained valuable training as a producer.
Highway Dragnet was a turning point for me. I had had several jobs knocking around town. I'd been a stagehand at Channel 13. At that time, I was a literary agent, and I wrote the script, which I called The House in the Sea, which became Highway Dragnet, based upon a trip I had taken to the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea is overflowing its banks in the desert, and I saw all of these old houses that were deserted, and the first floor was flooded. And I thought it would be a great climax to a picture, some sort of a chase across the desert and a shootout in a flooded house. And so I started with the climax of the film and worked back to create my story. When I sold the script of The House in the Sea, I asked to go along as an associate producer for no salary on the basis I would learn, and at the same time I could get a credit as associate producer. So when the film ended, I was able to set myself up as a writer-producer.
Corman's first film as an independent producer was called Monster from the Ocean Floor, which he made on a shoestring budget using money from the sale of Highway Dragnet and money he borrowed from some college friends.
I had a little office which was actually the reception office for an agent who didn't have very much money, and I operated out of that. I took the money from the sale of the script of The House in the Sea and then borrowed money from various classmates from college, putting together actually $12,000 in cash and a laboratory deferment to bring it up to $18,000, and shot the picture in 6 days in the coast of Malibu. I was surprisingly confident. If I were to do it now, I would be very worried that I could do it. But I think at the age of 25 or whatever I was, you have ambition and confidence, and you will do things that when you're older and smarter, you wouldn't do.
Roger is an interesting blend of, sort of businessman and audience advocate. And he believes that if he can make an entertaining movie for a price, that's an unbeatable formula. Given that parameter, you know, he is all for trying to deliver something that's fun to watch.
Perhaps the biggest break in Corman's early career came when he began his affiliation with Jim Nicholson and Sam Arkoff of American Releasing Company, which eventually became American International Pictures. Together, this team produced successful picture after picture, sometimes cranking them out in only a matter of days.
Monster from the Ocean Floor, which I originally called It Stalked the Ocean Floor, but the distributors thought that title was too arty, so they changed it to Monster from the Ocean Floor. Anyway, Monster did start my career as a producer. I took the money from that and did a road racing action film called The Fast and the Furious. I had several offers from major studios for the film, but I realized that the trap for an independent producer was you made a picture and then you waited a long time to get your money back, so you couldn't make very many films. And what I wanted to do was to get an advance back immediately to make a series of films. So I went with a new company, which was at that time called American Releasing, run by Jim Nicholson and Sam Arkoff. And I told them I would give them the film if they would give me all of my money back immediately as an advance against distribution and do the same thing on 3 more films so I could set myself up as a producer. They were happy to do that because The Fast and the Furious enabled them to start their company, and it then meant that I would be a steady supplier of films for them so the company could get rolling. I never even had a contract. I trusted them, they trusted me. They would give me money, I would make the film, and at a later date we would draw up the contract.
I'm very much inside the Roger Corman approach and every single level. And I also feel that, you know, certainly with the movies that we try to make inside the American studio system, and even, I think to a great degree, the independent movement, you know, everybody is exploiting something in the hopes of gaining an audience. Roger, you know, shamelessly says, yeah, we make exploitation films, and show me a film ultimately that isn't an exploitation film, i.e. a subject exploited to the maximum to excite an audience and bring in a good return for the dollar.
Hold it right there, mister.
Angie Dickinson, his big bad mama.
A mother's still got some rights in this country.
Hey, you can't do that.
The hell I can't.
Paradise, Texas, 1932.
We're gonna have everything we ever wanted.
Prosperity was just around the corner, at the nearest bank.
The money! Like John D. Rockefeller said, you gotta grasp the dynamics of money and keep the currency on the move.
My early films, and probably many of my current films, were what were called exploitation films, and I see nothing wrong with the statement. As a matter of fact, when Steven Spielberg did Jaws, Vincent Canby wrote in the New York Times, "What is Jaws but a big-budget Roger Corman film?" What happened subsequently is that the major studios began making the type of exploitation film I had been making, but of course they made them bigger, and I must admit they made them better.
Corman's first film as a director was the 1955 release of 5 Guns West, starring John Lund, Mike Connors, and Dorothy Malone.
The first film I directed was a Western called 5 Guns West. I shot it on a 9-day schedule at a ranch in the San Fernando Valley. I was very, very nervous. I had been very confident about my work as a producer, but as soon as I made the transition from producer to director, I became very, very shaky. All I could do was shoot in the morning and stare at the script and study it and try to figure out what to do in the afternoon.
Fast, fast, fast relief. Take the candy-striped nurses and go straight to bed. The New World Pictures, rated R.
The normal schedule for low-budget films in the 1950s was 10 days, simply 2 5-day weeks. That was what I normally did. I undercut that a couple of times. I did Bucket of Blood in 5 days, and I did Little Shop of Horrors in 2 days and a night, really as an experiment and as a joke to see if I could do it. And I remember Bob Towne, who went on to be an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, was a good friend of mine. When I finished, Bob said, "You must remember, Roger, making a film is not like a track meet. It's not how fast you go." And I said, "You're right, Bob. I'll never make a film in 2 days again."
Feed me! Oh, take it easy, Dracula. What do you think I'm carrying here, my dirty laundry? I'm coming already. This should be enough for anybody.
You know, it's interesting because my kids were watching the musical version of Little Shop of Horrors on video, and I sort of was watching that, and I thought it all goes back to the extraordinary, unique, particular kind of sense of humor that tickled Roger Corman. Nobody else, nobody in the world would have made a little tiny movie called The Little Shop of Horrors, which is such an amazing idea to begin with. He's the one. He just was an amazing trendsetter. So just on the conceptual level, he brought so much to the party. And then often in terms of picking people, I mean, Jack Nicholson, you know, did any number of movies with Roger, and not only as an actor, but also as a writer, as a second unit director, and what have you. It's just incalculable. No one, I don't think anybody can match up.
My name is Wilberforce.
Wilberforce what?
Just Wilberforce. My first name is Wilbur, my last name is Force. I don't have a middle name.
Well, you have an appointment, maybe?
No, but you were very highly recommended to me by one of your patients, Mrs. S. Shiva. I do a lot of undertaking for her relatives.
Well, as you can see, I have a customer now, and I'm all booked up for the rest of the day, so you'll have to come back tomorrow.
Oh, I couldn't do that. I have 3 or 4 abscesses, a touch of pyorrhea, 9 or 10 cavities. I lost my pivot tooth, and I'm in terrible pain.
Well, I can't help you today.
Oh, that's all right. I'll just wait outside.
I've been asked a number of times which is my favorite of the films I directed, and one day I'll say one day I'll say another day I'll say I don't like any of them. But for today, I would probably pick The Intruder, which was a somewhat more serious picture that I shot around 1960 on location in the South about the integration of schools in the South. It starred Bill Shatner, a new young actor from New York, and won a couple of film festivals, got wonderful reviews. One of the New York papers, and I still remember the opening line, said, "This motion picture is a major credit to the entire American film industry. It was the first film I ever made that lost money."
Abraham Silver, for one thing, belongs to the Quill and Pen Society, which receives its funds indirectly from Moscow. So what did the judge do? Went right ahead and ordered integration for the Caxton High School. Your mayor and the governor could have stopped it, but they didn't have the guts.
Corman remained with American International Pictures, cranking out black and white horror film after horror film, often 2 at a time, back to back. He wanted to move on to bigger films with bigger budgets and longer shooting schedules, and was able to convince Sam Arkoff and Jim Nicholson to let him shoot The Fall of the House of Usher, which starred Vincent Price.
I've been making a number of 10-day black and white films that would be shown as double features. 2 black and white horror films, 2 black and white science fiction films, whatever. And AIP asked me to make 2 black and white 10-day horror films. And I said, which I believed, that this was sort of a sales gimmick that had run its course. And that I would rather try a 15-day picture in color and just make 1 film. It was really because I wanted to do something different, but there was some validity to what I said, and they agreed. And the picture I chose was The Fall of the House of Usher, the Edgar Allan Poe story that I had read in school and always loved.
I'm afraid you're going to have to leave, Mr. Winthrop.
I've come to see Madeline.
That is quite impossible. She is confined to her bed.
Mr. Usher, your sister and I are betrothed.
It was a mistake.
I don't believe that.
Please don't argue with me, sir. You must leave this house now.
I've made just about every type of film there is, but I've made many horror films. I don't know why. I think anybody who's working in a creative medium is working partially out of their conscious mind and partially out of their unconscious. There probably is something somewhere in the back of my mind that makes me fascinated with fantasy, science fiction, and particularly horror.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more. Ah, distinctly, I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore.
The Poe films were shot almost entirely on sound stages. I had always had many theories. Right or wrong, the theories were there about how I made my films. And I felt the Poe films, being psychological horror stories, represented the unconscious mind, and I should shoot in an artificial environment because the unconscious mind didn't see reality. So I shot all of them except one, which I just changed because I got tired of my own theory, on sound stages. And I wanted to change and shoot on natural locations. At that time, the Hells Angels were very much in the news. And I saw a picture, I think in either Time or Newsweek, about the funeral of a Hells Angel in which all the bikers were on motorcycles with the coffin going to the graveyard.
We went to do this movie in 10 days for, like I said, $300,000 or less, about $285,000. Roger started hiring pieces of various outlaw motorcycle gangs that agreed to supply their bike, themselves, and their girlfriend, their old lady. Well, he had a bunch of actors and myself and Jack Nicholson and Dennis Hopper and Peter and other people that were around that were willing to go along with that. We loved it. We were actors that were interested in realism and just being real and being the people. So you surround us with Hell's Angels, that was fine with us. We weren't afraid of them or anything.
Hey, what you doing home so early?
I don't like nobody getting uptight with me, man. And that includes you.
Blap. Huh? Blues? What's the matter with him?
Oh, nothing, man. You know, his foreman got uptight. The mother doesn't like him getting messages at work.
So what did he do? Fire him?
Yeah, the fool fired me. He hassled my mind, man. You don't ever get a straight deal around here. Are you kidding?
That's 4 jobs in 5 months. We're never going to get this place fixed up.
Who cares?
I wish we could all have the 2020 vision of hindsight when we're doing things, because I did not know how important the film would become. I had no idea. I had a theater owner get in touch with me to say, I'd like to feature your movies one night in my theater, and I'd like to do a retrospective, and I want to use I couldn't wait to hear what he was going to say. I mean, what epic film. The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini. He said, I would like to do The Last of the Secret Agents and The Wild Angels. And, you know, who knew? Who knew? But he feels it's important enough to do a little art house thing about it.
What's eating you?
What's eating you, you mean?
The loser.
The loser? Oh, I thought you were sore at me.
What for?
Because of ugly. I thought you were thinking that I was, well, because the way I used to be and all, you know. I just figured that you thought
You talk too much.
I remember I asked him, I said, Roger, how many movies have you done? And he said, 100. That didn't really make me comprehend a whole lot until later in the day, and I thought to myself, is that right? He said 100? He's 35 years old, and he said 100 movies? He's made 100 movies? Well, I mean, I'm sure they were every kind of movie. He'd been making movies since he was 8 years old, probably. But he had made 100 movies that were, you know, released.
Soon the world will awake to a terrifying riptide of humanoids from the deep.
We think we know where these things come from, but we have no idea how many there are.
The Earth plunges into a battle for the survival of the fittest, where man is the endangered species and woman the ultimate prize. Anywhere you run, any place you hide, anytime you stop, they will find you. Doug McClure, Ann Turkel, Vic Morrow. Humanoids from the deep.
Early in 1970, I was in Ireland directing a World War I flying picture called Von Richthofen and Brown. I was so tired, I barely made it through that film, and I said to myself, I will complete this film, but I'm going to take a year off and then come back to directing. I took the year off, but to keep myself busy, I soon got bored. I decided to start a distribution company, which became New World Pictures. New World got off to such a fast start that within a year and a half, we were the biggest independent distribution company in the United States. We were almost competing with the majors. They knew who we were. They were aware of our distribution schedules, but even with our great position of #1 as the independents, we couldn't really challenge the major studios.
Corman is certainly known for his extensive list of alumni. He has given many of Hollywood's most outstanding directors, actors, writers, and producers their first break in the industry. Among the actors who have worked with Corman over the years are Sylvester Stallone, Jack Nicholson, Ellen Burstyn, David Carradine, Robert De Niro, Bruce Dern, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Diane Ladd, and many others.
He could afford to give tons of actors a lead in a picture. And it was a Roger Corman who was kind of like everybody's angel. He opened the door for us to get that almost impossible first opportunity.
A number of actors have gone on to acclaim an Academy Award stardom have started with me. Jack Nicholson, Bobby De Niro, Sylvester Stallone, Charlie Bronson, Peter Fonda, a number of people. I think one of the reasons I was able to find young actors of this talent is the fact that I studied acting myself as part of my preparation for directing, and I believed in going with the best actor available irregardless of their name value in these films. So I was able to find and use good young actors when other people were either afraid to give them a chance or were playing it safe and taking actors of a little greater name value.
It wasn't as if it was just actors. I mean, we had Francis Coppola was an AD, Peter Bogdanovich was a second, did all the second unit camera work on The Wild Angels. A few years later, he'd get guys like Joe Dante and Mike Fennell and Jonathan Demme and Dan Haller, and all these guys who went on to become big directors on their own were all guys that came to Hollywood hoping to gosh, they got a chance to work for Roger Corman.
Most of the directors who started their careers with me started as an assistant and worked up. I did sense something special in all of these directors. I was unable to predict that they would rise to the heights they would, but they had the three attributes I looked for. They were all intelligent, they all were willing to work very hard, and they had then that intangible, the creative spark, that they brought something new and original to the work.
Before Martin Scorsese directed such hits as Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Goodfellas, he directed a small film for Corman called Boxcar Bertha in 1972 that starred David Carradine and Barbara Hershey.
Most of the directors who started their careers with me started as an assistant and worked up. But with Marty Scorsese, I saw an underground film he had done in New York and was very, very impressed by it. I called him, we talked. I thought he was a bright and talented young man.
And he said, I'd like you to do the sequel to Bloody Mama. And I said, well, costumes at 30? He said, yeah, great. I said, okay. And then he said, well, he's going away. And it turns out he went away to get married. And in the meantime, I figured, well, I'll never hear from Roger Corman again. And John Cassavetes was out there, and I become friendly with John Cassavetes through another gentleman who worked for me over the years and still works for me, Jay Cox, who was a Time magazine movie critic. And he introduced me to John Cassavetes, showed him Who's That Knocking, and Cassavetes was very, very supportive of it and told me to keep making pictures like that. And so I was working for John for a few weeks on Minnie and Moskowitz as a sound effects cutter. And his assistant one day got a call from one of the agents I had at William Morris saying that they have a feature film for me to do. And she thought it was a joke. She hung up on them. So it's the kind of thing that was going on. Finally, the agent got in touch with me and said, Roger Corman's back. He wants you to do this film. It's called Boxcar Bertha. I said, fine. And I do recall the first 4 days were the hardest 4 days because what Corman had us do, and this is very important about Roger Corman and going through his university, so to speak, you learned how to make a picture on time and on schedule. He said, look, the hardest stuff is going to be the train. Anything with the train is going to be hard because you have to think about it. You take one shot of the train, it pulls up, action occurs, cut. Okay, you need one more take. Well, then you got to wait for the train to back up. And it's a big machine, and it takes time. And so he said, do all the train stuff in 4 days. Get the worst over with right away. And that, because you had the energy right away. But I learned a great deal in that picture, and I was so glad to just have gotten through the 24 days without getting thrown off the film. But he's right about that. Get it over with. Jump in and do it.
I did give these young directors a great deal of creative control. Probably from my own work as a director, I've always felt that a director should have full control on the set. I worked with them, and still work with directors in some detail in pre-production. But once the picture starts, I hardly even go to the set. I'm there for coffee on the first day, and then I leave it to the director. If there's a problem, I don't even go to the set. I will call him at lunchtime or in the evening and discuss it. So for me, the producer's work is in pre-production and then again in post-production, and during the film, it is the director's film.
In 1991, Jonathan Demme took the cinema world by storm with his film Silence of the Lambs. His first movie, however, was for Corman back in 1974, titled Caged Heat.
Caged Heat. Enter the female jungle of women's prison, USA. A seething hell of steel and stone where bodies behind bars ache with hunger for a man, any man. Where caged passions ignite in carnal confinement and explode into violence.
I was working as a publicist in the movie business, kind of at different studios and sort of marginal positions and writing press releases, and then I got into directing unit publicity for different studios. And it was Roger who sat there and said, well, you can write these press releases, why don't you write a script And I tried to do that, and with my partner Joe Viola. And under Roger's guidance, we wrote the script to a point where it was considered filmable. And then Roger sat there and said, well, you guys have done a good script. Why don't you direct it and produce it, the two of you? And so there we were. I never aspired to being a filmmaker. It was Roger who picked me out and set me on that course. So I doubt, I mean, who knows how our lives go, but I think it's unlikely that I would have been a filmmaker.
The great thing about Jonathan is how talented he is and how fast he learned. Every picture he did got better until he emerged as what he is today, one of the finest American directors, actually one of the finest directors in the world.
In my experience, and I got the impression it was fairly standard procedure when he offered a picture to a previously untried director as I was, there's the lunch, where in the course of about an hour and a half, because time is money too, you get what, as far as I'm concerned, is the equivalent of 4 years in film school. Just machine gun, the rules and regulation of how to make a film, very interesting from a directorial point of view. So it was a spectacular moment in my life as a filmmaker to be able to spend that time. He even picked up the check.
Angie Dickinson's back as Big Bad Mama.
Mama, they're shooting at us! That's their job, honey.
She makes money the old-fashioned way. She steals it.
Accepting stolen goods may be a crime.
So's poverty, Doc.
You're going straight to hell.
Yes, ma'am, just as fast as I can.
Now Mama and her girls are having the crime of their lives.
I've seen his type before. He only looks like trouble.
I don't know, Mama. I wouldn't mind giving him a ride.
You have to excuse Billie Jean. She gets a little boy crazy.
Jean?
Yes, Mama.
You know, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but I just know it's not a good idea.
You bathe with that thing?
I also sleep with it, so don't get any ideas.
Untouchable, she's unstoppable. She's hotter, meaner, and badder than ever. Big Bad Mama 2, starring Angie Dickinson.
Can't be anybody else.
I've been quoted as saying, make the most of what you've got, which I would translate as use what you have around you. I've found from experience that working with low budgets, which is what we normally do, you're better off taking the elements at hand to make the best low-budget film you can, rather than taking your money, whatever resources you have, and trying to pretend to make a big-budget film. I think you're more likely to fail doing that, and I think you have a greater chance of success if you recognize what the limitations of your budget, your schedule, and so forth are, and try to work within those limitations.
One of the most successful directors working today, Ron Howard, received his directing break from Corman back in 1977 with the release of Grand Theft Auto.
I got a script. My agent gave it to me, and it was for a movie called Eat My Dust. My agent was excited about it. He said it's produced by Roger Corman. I read the script, and I thought it was really horrible. I just didn't like it at all, no interest whatsoever, and I was about to dismiss it altogether, and then a light bulb went off in my head. And I went up to the meeting alone, talked to Roger, and I said, I'm not too crazy about this script, Eat My Dust, but the cliche of all cliches, what I really want to do is direct, and I have a script here. Roger read it very promptly, called me back a couple of days later. He said, the script that you have given us is, you know, it's really a character piece. It's a slice of life. That's not really what I'm doing. I'm interested in young people on the run. If you will act and Eat My Dust, I'll give you a chance to at least direct second unit on another movie and possibly a feature. And even though I didn't love that script particularly, it wound up being a fun romp of a movie and did very well at the box office, and you know, led to the directing opportunity that I was dreaming about.
And I said, Ron, you always looked like a director to me. And I will say Ron was probably the coolest first-time out director I've ever seen.
I'm Ron Howard. This is Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto is a love story with cars.
And I love him, and that's why we're going to Las Vegas to get married.
I want my Rolls Royce.
This Rolls Royce isn't exactly mine. Want to pull over and fool around a little? Also, it's a comedy. With car crashes.
We had a scene, and it was a kind of, I think it was a wedding scene where my character and Nancy Morgan, the actress who's playing the fiance, we finally at the end of the movie got married, and you know, we only had like about 15 extras scheduled, and I was in there with Roger saying, you know, it's been a big moment. The whole nation supposedly has been watching this ridiculous car chase, and it's all been about a wedding. And shouldn't there be, you know, shouldn't I have 100 people out there? No. Shouldn't I have 50 people out there? No, just do it in close up. I think you can do it with 15. And I was so frustrated. And he said, Ron, do a good job for me on this picture, and you'll never have to work for me again. But I understood that it was going to be 15 extras, and my job was to make 15 extras work that day.
Obviously, the thing that everybody will say about Roger is how stingy he was. You know, he was such a penny pincher. In fact, Joe Dante did a little spoof in The Howling in his film where he had Roger be this guy that came into a phone booth after the main character left and check the slot at the bottom to see if somebody had left a quarter, you know. He was legendary for that.
I do enjoy my new secondary career as a supporting actor, primarily with directors who started with me. It may well be that one time I gave them orders and now they can give me orders as an actor. It started with Francis Coppola on Godfather Part 2 when I played a senator on the Senate Crime Investigating Committee. All of the senators were writers, directors, or producers who were friends of Francis's. And he took us to lunch on the first day, and one of us, I think it was Bill Bowers, said, Francis, how did you pick us to be senators? And he said he'd been watching the Kefauver Crime Investigating Committee and noticed that all the senators looked distinguished and spoke well, and we were all feeling very good. And then he said, and they were all a little awkward on camera. And he said, I felt writers, producers, and directors would be able to do all of that, particularly being awkward on camera. I was maybe unusually awkward because the first day of shooting, just before my first line, I was sitting there and I was surprised at how heavy the lights were. You know, I was always on the other side of the camera. I couldn't see anything out there, just this array of white lights. And just before I was to speak, somebody called out and said, Raj, don't get nervous, but your entire Hollywood career depends on how you say these lines. And it was Jack Nicholson who, by prearrangement with Francis, had come over from another soundstage to throw me off before my first line.
James Cameron may have made the most expensive film ever, as well as grossed the biggest box office ever with his film Titanic. But back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, he was cutting his teeth working for Roger Corman.
Well, Roger was doing a film called Battle Beyond the Stars, which ultimately turned out to be his most expensive film, so it's only appropriate that I should work on it. And I was hoping to break in as a visual effects modeler, director of photography, that sort of thing. And so I just basically went and knocked on the door and said, guys, you should hire me. I went to Roger and I said, you know, I've been watching this production for the last few weeks, and you've got all the model builders and special effects people over here, and you've got all the sort of main production unit people over here, and there's no sort of attempt to put the characters into the visual effects settings. So I proposed to him that we did front screen projection, which had a long history going back to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I quoted. Now, I had never done front screen projection, but nobody else had either in the company. So I became the head of front screen projection, had my own little office and hired a couple of assistants and everything, created my own department.
And by the end of the picture, he had been promoted 3 times and was head of the special effects department. On the next picture, he was head of special effects and production designer. The next picture, he did both of those jobs, and he was then also a second unit director. So Jim is an example of somebody who rose very rapidly, totally on ability.
My first filmmaking experience obviously is going to be the most formative, and the lessons that I learned there, which were kind of not specific in the sense that I didn't necessarily learn specific things that helped me later, but I learned to have the confidence that I could do this type of work. You know, and that's what Roger does, because it's a very sink or swim thing. I'm not saying that everybody that works in these ultra low budget films comes out with a sense of confidence, but the ones that do emerge from that and move on and go up the evolutionary ladder, as no matter what craft or guild they go on to work in, they're going to have the confidence of having been through that kind of guerrilla, combat filmmaking.
After building New World Pictures into the biggest and most successful of the American independents, Corman received an offer he couldn't refuse. So he sold the company, only to begin all over again with his newest studio, New Concord.
I didn't really start out to sell New World Pictures. 3 Hollywood lawyers came to me and offered to buy it, and they offered me more money than I thought the company was worth. So after a little negotiation, I sold it to them, and as these things will do, I don't know why this always happens. There was a number of months of drawing up the contract. We were supposed to sign it one evening, and it worked till around midnight that night, after all these months, finally to draw up the contract. So around 12 or 12:30, we signed the contract. They gave me the check. We drank champagne. I went home, and I came back the next morning and started another company.
Actor-director Carl Franklin has directed such hit films as Devil in a Blue Dress with Denzel Washington, but cut his teeth early on for producer Corman, directing the 1989 Eye of the Eagle 2 and Full Fathom 5 in 1990.
When the directors work for Roger for the first time, he sits you down and basically tells you in a very, very short thumbnail way of how to make a movie. And I guess it started out as a 30-minute speech, and it's over the years he's refined it down to 10 minutes. And he tells you, I'm trying to remember what the things were that he said. I remember him saying to definitely take the time to rehearse, not to ask the cinematographer / operator, because they're usually one and the same, always one and the same with Roger, because there's no money for 2 positions. That they, if the cinematographer says it, if the cameraman says he's got it, he got it. Not to sit around and worry about that. Various ways to try to save time. He is inflexible in terms of his formula. You never go over in a Roger Corman movie. For his domestic films, you had 18 days to shoot those. And you don't go to 19 days. You don't go to 20 days. Roger starts pulling out pages if it gets, so it forces you into a mode of work that you probably are not familiar with, and forces you to have to be very economical. So I think that because he came upon a formula that worked for the kinds of films he wanted to make, for the kind of market he wanted to address, and he was inflexible about applying that formula, I think that's probably the key to his success. I mean, he was the first one to give me that vote of confidence in the form of saying, look, I trust you enough to give you a budget to go out and make me a movie, which, regardless of what you want to say about the operation and the limitations, is a huge vote of confidence for a first-time director. You could say I owe my career to him, in some ways, because no one else had given me the shot.
When you finish directing a movie for Roger, 2 things. If you've enjoyed that, you're going to enjoy everything you ever do, because it is a sort of trial by fire. But you're also going to be really well prepared, because that's one of the things that Roger really insists upon is a game plan, a point of view, an artistic, creative point of view, and a practical point of view as to how you're going to actually go out and get the shots that you need day in, day out, hour after hour. He'll even give you strategies for, you know, how to maximize your day. If you need sunlight and there's a hill, he'll tell you, save certain close-ups for the end of the day, and then as the sun's going down here, take the camera and maybe a shiny board and the sound person and run up the hill with the actors and literally chase the sun and do your tight close-ups where you won't notice the difference between the background at the end of the day. Well, believe it or not, that sounds like a sort of a cheesy trick to be used only in the, you know, lowest budget filmmaking and maybe some TV. It wasn't 10 years later that I wasn't grabbing Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman and, you know, an A cinematographer and a camera and one sound person and running them up a hill at the end of the day to get an important shot in this movie Far and Away that I did that was, you know, an A+ studio movie with all the trimmings. So those tricks come in pretty handy.
Somebody set her house on fire and her son is still inside.
I know you have returned. Reveal yourself. Who are you? Give me what you promised, or I will break him, Victor. I will crush everyone around you. Then I will crush you.
In a career spanning 5 decades, Roger Corman has received accolades from all over the world. In 1964, he was the youngest filmmaker ever to be honored by the French Film Institute and was recognized at the 1966 Venice Film Festival with the premiere of The Wild Angels. He has received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Science Fiction, Horror, and Fantasy, as well as the LA Film Critics Award for Career Achievement. In 1998, Corman was honored at the Cannes Film Festival for his career as a producer. Corman continues to give young hopefuls the chance to learn on the job and to perfect their craft on small films, and has given back far more talent to the motion picture industry than he ever could take in profits. A fitting tribute to the legend that is Roger Corman.
I asked Roger to come and act in a scene and play a senator in a visiting senator in Apollo 13. And he came and he looked around at all the trailers and all the blue screen that we had for that day, because we were going to extend the set and create a huge sort of background. And here I had Tom Hanks, you know, making movie star money and all the trappings. And he had this sort of bemused look on his face all day long. And he said, well, I understand this kind of filmmaking. I go to the theater and I enjoy it, but, you know, I'm so glad that I'm never burdened with, you know, this kind of investment and this kind of responsibility. It's I think he has more fun keeping it tight, keeping it lean, and going out there and seeing what he can get. I think that's part of the excitement. Is how far can you stretch a production dollar? What can you actually achieve? I think if he had everything in the world to work with, half the fun would be gone for Roger.
Motion pictures have changed in a number of ways from the days when I started. From a production standpoint, it's changed probably mostly in the equipment. The cameras are lighter, more portable, better. The sound equipment particularly is far better, and again, lighter. Same thing with grip and electrical, so that where we were heavily studio bound a number of years ago, you can now go on natural locations with smaller, lighter equipment and shoot more efficiently. I think it's a great tool for the filmmaker to be able to use this new equipment. From the business side of it, I think the biggest change for the independents is that when I started in the late 1950s, no matter how low a budget I had on a film, every film got a full theatrical release. Today, the major studios dominate theatrical distribution so heavily that I'd say no more than 20–25% of our films get a theatrical release. We're more dependent upon home video, pay television, and now DVD is coming up, and the internet, I think, is right around the corner. The American motion picture industry dominates world cinema, probably more so than any other American industry, so I don't think it has failed as such, but I would say one of the ways in which it's not reached its full potential is the fact that there is so much emphasis on the blockbuster, the huge 100 or 150 or whatever $1 million picture with a $20 million advertising campaign, that American films have stepped away from the more personal film, the more, to use the old word, the more auteur or art-driven film. And I think there is a failure in thinking of the major studios, and I think that provides an opportunity for the independents. We don't have to appeal to the lowest common denominator and get giant numbers of people. We can make a smaller film with a lower budget that is more personal to us and maybe more interesting to one segment of the audience, and just reach that one segment. And I think this is a big opportunity for the independents, and we hope to be working more in that area ourselves. I don't know exactly how to sum up my career other than the fact that I would think of myself as a filmmaker. I've done everything from being a messenger at 20th Century Fox to being a truck driver on location to being a writer, a producer, a director, distributor, even a sometime actor. So I would think I'm somebody who has worked in all areas of motion pictures. I would hope that I've contributed something to the American film industry, and I've had a great time doing it. I've been around a long time, but there are still a few productive years left. I would like to concentrate on making fewer films, but making more personal films that would give me pleasure to make and might be more meaningful to audiences. I'm not certain I'll be remembered in the years to come, but if I am remembered in film history, it'll probably be as a medium range or lower range worker in films who contributed something on his own and also contributed something to giving other people opportunities.